Hello, my name is Fred Bailey. I was born and raised down in Walpole, New Hampshire. Lived there the first 26 years of my life. At age 2, my folks bought me a Lionel electric train and got me interested in railroading, and I've been interested in railroads ever since. Early on, my folks used to take me over to the railroad station at Bellows Falls so I could watch trains. It was the end of the steam era. The last steam locomotives to run in this neck of the woods were puffing through town. And I learned to love and appreciate the steam locomotive at that time in my life. I grew up, went to college, graduated from college. I was looking for a job, and I was hanging around a place, a railroad museum in Bellows Falls called Steamtown, USA. I'd known about Steamtown since the late 1950s because a gentleman by the name of F. Nelson Blount established the museum originally over in New Hampshire, moved to Vermont in 1964. So after college, I didn't go right out and get a job. It was probably foolish on my part to hang around a railroad museum, but in the end, the fellow that was the general manager that summer, he was from Florida, a retired Army person, and he decided to go home early. And he said, "Fred, you've been hanging around here a lot. How'd you like a job?" So I took a job, and I showed slides that first year in the slideshow car, and I put together a narration, and everybody thought I did a good job. So at the end of the season, Edgar Mead, who was from up here in the White River area, he was the executive director there at Steamtown at the time. He said, "Next spring, Fred, I'd like to get the Board of Trustees to create a job for you. It's going to be called Assistant to the Director." And there were some issues with funding for the job, and it didn't quite turn out to be what I hoped it was going to be. I mean, I was a college graduate at the time, and they wanted to pay me minimum wage. And I said, "Wait a minute here, Edgar. I can't work for minimum wage." I said, "You got to get me at least $100 a week." Well, they were able to do that, and I started my 17-and-a-half-year career with Steamtown, USA. Several years later, we had a fellow who was one of the pioneer railroad photographers here in the White River area. What you have to realize, trains started running here in the White River area in the mid-1800s, like 1849, in that neck of the woods. But there weren't a lot of people out there taking pictures of trains back in those days. It really all came together in like the 1940s and 1950s, right at the end of the steam era. And there were a number of very well-known photographers that came here to White River Junction to record the last of the steam era. People like Phil Hastings, Jim Shaughnessy, Al Thomas, John Krause, Robert Collins, Hal Kerstens, and a number of other people. One day, John Krause came to me. He was our official photographer at Steamtown in the mid-1970s. He said, "Fred, I've taken all of these wonderful pictures of the end of the steam era and early diesel era in northern New England. I'd like to put them together in a book, but I really don't know how to go about it." He said, "I have the pictures. You're a writer. Would you be willing to co-author a book with me?" And I did. It's called Trains of Northern New England by John Krause and Fred Bailey. John invited me down to his dark room in Rockville, Long Island, New York, and we sat there and we talked about how are we going to put this book together. Well, we came up with a title, and we said, we'll call it Trains of Northern New England. That was, pretty obvious decision. But then he said, how are we going to bring all of these different railroads in northern New England together? And we talked about it. Finally, I came up with an idea. I said, John, there's one place that railroads come together, and that's called the junction point. And he said, yeah, that's a good idea. What would you propose for the junction points to be? And I said, well, it just happens that all of the railroads in northern New England come together at 3 different locations in Vermont: St. Johnsbury, White River Junction, and Bellows Falls. Okay, so we put the book together. And like most railroad books, it doesn't sell an awful lot of copies. But it did tell the story of John Krause's photography up here. And there are many other books out there that tell the history of the photography in the area. Here's one called Central Vermont Railway. Guess what's in there? A section about White River Junction. Just about every railroad book that's out there that has anything to do with this neck of the woods talks very heavily about White River Junction, because that was a major junction point of the railroads in this neck of the woods. The Central Vermont main line ran through town. The Boston and Maine's Conn River line from down in Springfield, Mass, all the way up to Wells River runs through town. The line from Boston, the Northern Railroad, came into Lebanon and then connected here into White River Junction. So it was a big place. There were a lot of trains and a lot of locomotives that came here into town. In retrospect, White River Junction was a big place in the days of the railroad. And that heritage should not be forgotten. It should be remembered, and remembered well. If you know where to look in books, you can find a lot about the history of White River Junction. These books should be available to everybody here in White River to take a look at and remember what we had in the railroads, because that's about the only way today that the early days of the railroad can be remembered here in printed history. The people that took a lot of these pictures are gone today. A few of them are still alive, but they're in their waning years. If we don't keep track of this history, it's going to be lost. And that's why I say, like the Historical Society here in town, I keep being told, well, they're not interested in the railroads. They should be. Everybody that's here in White River Junction should be interested in what happened in the past. When Steamtown, USA left for Scranton, Pennsylvania, Edgar Meade wanted to take, or actually acquire, several of the locomotives to be put on display up here in White River Junction. Locomotives that either operated on the Central Vermont or were sister locomotives to the ones that operated here. On the cover of my book, that's Grand Trunk Western 6039. Not a Central Vermont locomotive, but the Canadian National owned the Central Vermont, and it also owned the Grand Trunk Western. So it was common at the time for locomotives on other subsidiaries of the Canadian National to operate on sister roads, like the Central Vermont was to the Grand Trunk Western. 6039 was a locomotive in the Steamtown collection. It still is. We had a sister locomotive to Canadian National 5288 that used 5289 rather, that used to run here on the CV all the time. We had 5288, sister locomotive, next engine in number. We had Canadian Pacific D10 10-wheeler, used to come down here into White River all the time on pool trains with the Canadian Pacific. Canadian National 282 types. The sister engines operated on the CV. If there had been a place here in White River Junction that Edgar could have taken these locomotives to, I believe the Steamtown board would have given them 1 or 2 locomotives. But typical of what's happened here in White River Junction over the years, no place to put anything, no money to bring the stuff here. It's too bad, because White River has had its chance to have a number of great things happen here. Back a number of years ago, some of the local folks here established what they call the New England Transportation Institute and Museum, NETM. And I first learned about NETM one day when Jeff Albright, who at the time was chief mechanical officer for the Claremont-Concord Railroad and later became part owner, he was talking to me. He said, "Fred, there's a bunch of folks up there in White River, and they're trying to establish a big railroad museum in the Lebanon-White River area." Well, the Claremont-Concord, at least the short stretch of track on the former Northern over there in West Lebanon. And what the folks in White River were talking about over in West Lebanon was incorporating the old B&M roundhouse and the sand house and the bunkhouse into what they were going to call a railroad campus. Well, Jeff said to me, I'm sort of opposed to that because we don't have much room for our freight business over there. If we get some sort of a museum operation involved, it's going to take up a lot of room, and it's going to hurt what we're planning for the future. I said, well, Jeff, let's think about this for a minute. What is the Claremont-Concord trying to do at the moment? Well, we want to get into the business of rebuilding historic equipment. Yep, you need a place to do that. We need an engine house for our locomotives over in West Lebanon. Yep. And if they come in here and they take over that roundhouse, there goes a lot of the land that we need. Well, I said, I have a different view of that. I said, I helped put together a National Historic Site down in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And when I was talking to Sophie here the other day, she said, don't forget one comment. Well, I said, you have to have somebody, if you're going to make something big, that thinks out of the box. Somebody that can lead, somebody that can come up with ideas that nobody else is going to think of. So Jeff Albright came over to my house. My friend Al Thomas, one of the photographers that shot trains up here for many, many years, since the late 1940s, he was there. And we talked. I said, Jeff, this is my idea. Let's take that old roundhouse. Let's do something with it that will put West Lebanon on the map and also help with the railroad campus theme that they're trying to propose in White River Junction. Let's take that 6-stall roundhouse, let's rebuild it. You need an engine house. We'll give you 2 stalls to put your locomotives and maintenance away equipment in. That solves your problem with that. We'll take 2 stalls and we'll make a modern restoration shop out of that. And we'll go beyond that. We'll do like they've done in other places. We'll make a walkway through that restoration shop so that the people that come to the railroad campus can walk through that and watch you guys restoring this old equipment. And then I'm going to do something that's never been done anywhere else before. We're going to reinstall the turntable. We're going to get a RDC bud car to haul people around the area. We're going to run that right onto that turntable, spin it around. No place else in the country can people ride a piece of equipment onto a turntable and see what it was like to have the turntable position a piece of equipment to a stall in the roundhouse. And I said, we'll take the remaining stall and we can put some sort of a display, whether it's a steam locomotive or a diesel or whatever, in there. And then we can take all of this track that you have over there, and at the time the track went all the way into Lebanon. I said, we can make a shuttle service that'll take people all around the area. I said, it's going to take a lot of doing to put it all together because there's 3 different railroads involved. And Jeff said, well, do you think the CNC could run that shuttle service? I don't know that. It's something that's possible. So when it was over, he said, oh my God, where did you come up with all these ideas? I said, well, I've been around for a while. I put together with a number of people in Scranton the National Historic Site. I do have some ideas. And he said, well, I want to introduce you to David Briggs over in White River Junction. He's on the NETM board over there. He might like to talk to you. Well, I talked to David, and he invited me to join the Needham board. And I was on there for several years. They were talking about getting all of the railroad sites that were over here in White River Junction, as well as the roundhouse in West Lebanon, together to make a railroad campus. It was a great idea. It was the CV Roundhouse. There was a Twin State Fruit building that was available at the time. There was a B&M freight house. There was the railroad station. There was a B&M yard down here south of town, and there was a large parcel of land just east of the yard that was available. Man, if those pieces of property could have all been acquired, I'm trying to think of the right word now, but the backbone of what we needed to put a major railroad museum together was all there. The only problem was, it's the same problem that White River in Vermont has had over the years. It's a thing called money. Well, I was told by people on the Needham board, you know, we have people down in Washington that we can go to. At the time, they were talking about James Jeffords and Bernie Sanders. Well, I was well aware of what was needed political-wise in Washington to make something happen, because there's a basic reason that there's a Steamtown National Historic Site in Scranton today. One of the basic reasons. That was a congressman by the name of Joe McDade. He was chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. And you can say what you want about Steamtown. You can call it pork barrel or whatever you want to call it. But Joe McDade got the money to make it happen. Initially, $68 million. That collection of locomotives that was right down in Bellows Falls is now a National Historic Site in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And it's due in a large part to the fact that a congressman pushed it, and he got a lot of money to make it happen. I was told we have people who donate money in this neck, philanthropists. We know all sorts of them. Well, I don't know, where they are, because they never came around and donated money. And I was told we have grant writers. They can get all sorts of money for us to do all sorts of wonderful things. Well, nobody ever came through to buy these parcels of land and buildings around here that were needed to make the museum, the railroad campus a reality. But Needham did go on. They helped get the money for the canopy that's over the 494 steam locomotive here in White River now, and that's something that's needed to preserve a steam locomotive. You leave them out in the weather and they fall to pieces pretty quick. And they did run glory days for a few years. And they did establish a small museum in the railroad station, which until last fall was still in place. Unfortunately, the state of Vermont bought the station last October, and what did they do? They raised the rent of everybody that's in the building. Well, poor Needham doesn't have much money now, and they couldn't afford the rent anymore. So the nice little railroad museum that they had here for a number of years, it had to fall by the wayside. Without the station space to keep the artifacts, Needham had to dispose of the artifacts it had, and now Needham as an organization faces an uncertain future. That's sad, because it had a potential to do something good for White River Junction and the state of Vermont, and it's gone. Same thing happened, ditto, to the Green Mountain Railroad's White Mountain Flyer up here. For a number of years, the White Mountain Flyer, run by the Green Mountain Railroad, operated excursion trains out of White River Junction. At the end of the 2013 season, quietly, the Green Mountain Railroad stopped running the White Mountain Flyer. This spring, people here in town, they tried to get together with the community of Bellows Falls and run for 10 days tourist trains. Well, the Green Mountain Railroad, Vermont Rail System, they've decided they want to run charter trains now, although they will be running a few trains out of Chester due to pressure from the state of Vermont on their own this year. But it was a big opportunity for White River Junction to have a tourist train long-term up here. Why did the White River Flyer fall by the wayside? Well, there were several reasons for it. Declining ridership over the years. Who can you blame for that? Well, there's a lot of blame to go around. Also, the state of Vermont did the same thing to the railroad as they did to the Nedham Museum. They raised the rent in the station. So when they did that, the railroad said, well, we can't afford to be in the White River Station anymore. So not only did their offices in the station go bye-bye, so did the gift shop that they ran there. I talked to people over in the visitor center today, and they say, oh, people are coming around all the time looking for the White Mountain Flyer, looking for the gift shop, but it's not here anymore. Nope, that's right, it's not here. Another loss. And now the National Railroad Historical Society, 494 chapter of the NRHS, it was established initially to help the town of Hartford restore and maintain the historic Boston and Maine steam locomotive that's on display here in town. Well, unfortunately, the membership in the NRHS chapter is aging. A lot of the people that were in their 30s and 40s when the chapter was established and were able to get out there and crawl up on the steam locomotive and paint it and polish it and do all sorts of things around it, they're no longer physically able to do it. And it's a real problem. There's none of the younger folks here in White River that are interested in the steam locomotive or really in railroading here in town. That's sad. Because 494 is on the National Register of Historic Places. And as I just wrote in the Valley News, doesn't a steam locomotive that's on the National Register of Historic Places deserve a little respect? I think it does. You know, we come to an event that they're having here on September 13th. It's called Glory Days of the Railroad. From what I read in their promotions, it's the 22nd year of the event. I've been to a lot of them. There's been some that have been pretty impressive, some that haven't been too impressive, depending on what equipment is showing up. But this year, equipment from all of the major railroads that serve this area are going to be here in town. What does that mean to White River Junction? Well, I don't know. Is Glory Days just going to be another event that we have for the kiddies to have a good time, for the families to come and have a good time? Or is White River Junction going to get the publicity out of this event that it should get? And more importantly, are the railroads going to get the publicity out of this event that they should? The railroads are bringing millions of dollars of equipment into town to put on display at Glory Days at no cost to the town. This event should be publicized for what it is, a major event, a major railroad-themed event in New England and possibly the entire Northeast in 2014. When you think about what's coming here, all you have to do is take magazines that promote big events. Well, the biggest event in the United States this year was Streamliners at Spencer down in North Carolina. You get magazines that cover these events, give the area big publicity. Here's PAR number 1, Pan Am Southern number 1. Here it is at Spencer, North Carolina. That locomotive's going to be here in White River Junction. Here's Amtrak's Veterans Unit, a specially painted locomotive. It's on a nationwide tour. Here it is at the biggest event in the country. It's going to be right here in White River Junction on September 13th. Don't you think White River Junction should at least get a little bit of the coverage that some of these other places are getting around the country? I think so, but I don't know as the promoters of the event here in White River Junction realize what they've got, or even believe that the event is big as it is, or perhaps worse, all they want to have is their annual little party. Well, if you're just going to have an annual little party, don't invite railroads to bring millions of dollars of equipment into town and not give them the credit that they deserve, because that's what they're looking for out of the event. A big event like this is bringing equipment into town and getting some publicity out of it. I, would like to have helped promote the event. I offered to do that several times, and I was not given the opportunity. It's not that I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, I can share these all with you right here, but for Transpo 1998 in Bellows Falls, I wrote all sorts of press releases, got all sorts of free publicity. When the director of the Parks and Recreation Department tells me that we don't have any money to promote the event, and I said, yes, I'm well aware of that. I was told that by several people. I said, what you have to do is use the help that you have, the knowledge that you have available to you by people that have promoted these events before, and get yourself all sorts of publicity in the press. It's a simple thing to do. You write press releases, you write about every piece of equipment that's coming into town, you give the railroads the publicity, you promote the event. And back in the days when I was doing it, I had to get there on the typewriter and type that up, go on to copy machines and make zillions of copies, then address envelopes and send them all out, pay the postage. Well, today, like Tom Nemeth, the editor of Railpace magazine, told me here a few days ago, it's so simple today with the electronic media. You just put together a library of people that you want to send press releases to. You make up the release. You figure out who you want to send each individual release to. Go into the library, pick out the places you want it to go, put it into the computer, press a button, it goes just like that all over the country. A very simple thing, and it doesn't cost anything. All you need is a computer, somebody to run it, and somebody to make up the releases. Well, I would have been more than happy to make up the releases, but my help wasn't needed, so that's fine. But in order to make an event like this get the publicity that it deserves, you've got to get the word out there to the general public. Now, I see around town here within the last week or two, there's all sorts of flyers and posters showing up. Well, they should have been showing up all around the area for a long time. This is an event that's been in the planning stage since at least May. If you do like the big events do, you build upon it. Every time you get a new piece of equipment added to what you're going to have on display, you make up a press release about it, you send it out. And the thing is, you don't worry about how many people you send it to. All it takes is for having one newspaper or newsletter or magazine pick it up. And man, if UPI or AP or Reuters or any other news service picks it up, or any travel editor picks it up and sends it out, you get publicity just like that all over the country. And believe me, I know, because I've done it in the past. But you have to get somebody that takes the bull by the horns and puts all of the resources in the community together. No one person can make it happen. No one person deserves the credit for making it happen. What you have to do is use your resources. If you've got somebody here in the community that's got artistic ability, David Briggs over here in the Briggs block, he's offered the town a window front over there, free of charge for their use to help promote Glory Days. Well, I said, David, all we need is somebody that's got a little graphic art. A 3-line banner coming September 13th. Line 2, Glory Days of the Railroad. Line 3, the largest rail-themed event in New England or the Northeast, whatever you want to put there. Then we get Kevin Burkholder. He's a wonderful photographer. There's other photographers around here. We have some pictures made up. You get somebody with graphic arts, and they put little captions about the equipment that's coming into town. Now, I ask you, isn't that a lot better than having a storefront over there with nothing in it? I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Why don't we have a banner across Main Street that says Glory Days of the Railroad, largest rail-themed event in New England? They do it down in Bellows Falls. They do it in my little hometown of Charlestown, no big deal. When the Rotary wants to have a penny sale in Charlestown, man, there's a big banner across the street. Can't we figure out simple things like that here in White River Junction? I don't know. I guess maybe I'm spoiled. I've been around a long time, around the railroad scene, and I'm interested in what goes on. Yes, I've talked about going down to Scranton, Pennsylvania, and being part of helping establish a National Historic Site down there. Well, I was involved in the syndicated column that was published by a syndicated columnist by the name of Michael McManus. He's the guy that said there's a dying railroad museum up in Vermont and it's looking for a new home. When that column was published around the country, the telephone started ringing off of the hook in Bellows Falls, where Steamtown was located at the time. There was one man down in Scranton, Pennsylvania, that put 2 and 2 together. He said, we have an abandoned railroad yard down here, and we're looking for something to do with it. And he became the main cog, the gentleman that I'm talking about that White River Junction needs to promote its railroad heritage. He started working through the newspaper that he was managing editor of, but he got people interested in Scranton about bringing Steamtown down to that abandoned railroad yard. I went down there very early on. Ed Rogers knew how to bring the community together. He knew how to get everybody that needed to be in the picture into the picture. And it was interesting because there was a convent down there, a Catholic convent. One of the nuns took on a fundraising campaign. It was called Pennies from the Children. And she went around to all of the schools and, yeah, the kids started donating pennies. And then there was an abandoned storefront down there, actually a whole store called the Oppenheimer building. Man, the people that owned that building, there was nothing in it, but they gave it to the Model Railroad Club for use to put together a big model railroad display. People came to that and they gave $5 to come in and see the display and went to the fundraising campaign. I went down one time and the fellow that was running the fundraising for the mayor of Scranton, Jim McNulty, he said, we're going to go over to Chuck E. Cheese. I said, what's Chuck E. Cheese? I'd never heard of it before. Well, it's a big pizza joint. But they have a great stage that has characters that entertain the kids. He said to me, we're going to go over there so you can see what Chuck E. Cheese is, but he said, more important, all of the money that Chuck E. Cheese takes in over the next few days, a portion of that is going to the Steamtown fundraising drive. And then I got to talk to some of the other people down there. Well, Scranton, Pennsylvania, before Steamtown came there, the thing that it was most known for was a big junkyard along Interstate 81. Oh man, it was an eyesore. Everybody talked about it. They wrote about it in the newspapers up here in Vermont. You know, ha ha ha, Steamtown's going down to a place where the only thing it's known for is a slum and a junkyard. Well, the thing they didn't realize is that junkyard was owned by a fellow by the name of Louis D. Naples. Louis D. Naples made a fortune out of that junkyard, so much so that he owned a bank up in Dunmore. He owned the Pocono Northeast Railroad. And he gave $300,000 to the Steamtown Fund. Okay. Do you see the point? You have to get people together. You have to have the person to do it. And you have to have the connections. Over the years, the city of Scranton gave a lot of money to Steamtown. Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania gave a lot of money. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania gave a lot of money. And today, the federal government is giving $6 or $7 million a year to the National Historic Site in Scranton. You have to think big. You have to get out of the box and make things happen. So, has White River done everything that they could have done to promote Glory Days this year? Like the director of the Parks and Recreation Department told me here just a couple of weeks ago he'd done. I really don't know. You know, there's a bunch of stuff around town here, but just yesterday, I was down in Bellows Falls. And I said, just for the fun of it, I think I'm going to take a ride up Route 5 on the way back to the White River area. So I stopped at the railroad station in Bellows Falls. Well, Amtrak is promoting Glory Days quite heavily. If you look at the wonderful posters they've put together, it's pretty obvious that they want to be here, and they're helping promote the event. There's a lot of debate out there why Amtrak decided to come this year. That's for Amtrak to know, and I'm not going to get involved in that debate. But I can say one thing. They're bringing a fantastic display train into town. And for whatever reason they're doing it, it deserves a lot of publicity. Amtrak deserves a lot of publicity for their part in promoting the event here. And I hope they get it. But when I went down to Bellows Falls, I went around town at the Amtrak station in the window, and fortunately, at least in Bellows Falls, the Amtrak poster is in the door and it's facing out so that any hour of the day, people who come to the Amtrak station can see it there. Unfortunately, whoever placed it in the window put it behind another poster that was there rather than the open window right next to it. Then I went up the pike a ways to Ascutney. Got up to the Ascutney Market. Oh, never noticed the Ascutney Market before, but I'm looking to see places where posters should be that promote events in the area. Oh, the whole wall of the Ascutney Market. Man, I learned all about a macaroni festival and a beer fest over in Claremont. But with all of this other stuff that was on that wall, do you think there was a single poster or anything, brochure of the Glory Days of the Railroad? No, and then I drove up the road to Windsor. Looked around down at the railroad station, thought maybe they would have posted an Amtrak poster down there. No, nothing. Went up into town. One of the storefronts had a number of things chalked on the window about events that are coming up. Right in the center of town, there was a poster place where you can put coming events, that right across the event, across the top, coming events. Whole top filled with posters. Was there anything about Glory Days? Guess what? No. Then I came up here and I went to the rest area on Interstate 91. Nice, brand new, beautiful building over there. Signs on it, Hartford. Went inside, railroad themed, A couple of beautiful pictures of White River Junction. Oh, I learned about events at the Billings Farm Museum and a quilt fest. But one of the biggest places that tourists go to in the area, was there anything about Glory Days? No. Am I being critical? Probably some people are going to think that. I think I'm just being realistic. I think when you have a big event, you promote it. There are 3 times in Vermont's history that there have been big railroad events. In 1981, Steamtown had a Rail Fans Weekend, and we had locomotives from 5 different railroads there, and we got some good publicity out of it. In 1998, and for a couple of years afterwards, but particularly 1998, Bellows Falls had Transpo. And the first year, we had a display of locomotives that was similar to what they're going to have here in White River Junction this year. It got a lot of publicity, gained Bellows Falls a lot of goodwill. And now, it's been 15 years since that happened. But what do we have here in White River Junction this year? We have the biggest railroad-themed event that's ever happened in the state of Vermont. It's happening right here in White River Junction, and it should get the publicity that an event of this nature deserves. Yes, I showed you there in the magazine about streamliners at Spencer. We can't compare with that. There was a lot more there. But out in Owasso, Michigan, they had an event with 8 steam locomotives here just a couple of months back, gained national attention. We can compare with that, and we should get the same publicity that that event out there got. And there's a number of other events all around the country this year that have garnered big attention. For example, the Amtrak display train that's coming up here, their exhibit train, it was just down to the Valley Railroad in Connecticut. What did the Valley Railroad do? They have a steam locomotive down there. They coupled the steam locomotive to the head end of the Amtrak display train and pulled it into their station at Essex. And what do you think that did for the display train and Amtrak? The press was down there. They covered that event all over the state of Connecticut. And man, people came out of the woodwork to be there for the event. You know, quite frankly, I don't know what the problem is with some of the people in the area up here. I just copied a few things out of the Valley News on last Sunday. Well, the Valley News was well aware of the nature of what the event is going to be here in town. Well, here's Sunday Focus. Oh, big story. Colorado town requires residents to own guns. Now, isn't that very apropos to what's going on here in White River Junction? I don't know, I shake my head. Then, oh my God, look at this. Another story about the co-op. How many times do we have to hear something about the co-op? But, you know, I'm showing you, just take a look at this. Look at the size of this, look at the size of this, and then here. Glory Days Festival features trains and music. Looks to me like they didn't talk to anybody, they just took it off of the Glory Days flyer, and it's a staff report. Now tell me, is this the best the Valley News could do to promote the biggest railroad event that the state of Vermont has ever had and very possibly ever will have? I don't know, it just bothers me that we can't do better. I guess I was spoiled by going to Scranton and see what they did down there. I guess I was spoiled by going down to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee a couple of times. I don't know if you know what Pigeon Forge is, but it's the home of Dollywood. Country and Western singer Dolly Parton is behind that. But when you get 50 miles outside of Dollywood, anywhere you go, people start saying to you, have you been to Dollywood? Are you going to Dollywood? And then you get a big story about what Dollywood means to the Pigeon Forge area, and what a great lady Dolly Parton is, what she does for the community. When I was working with Steamtown, I had the opportunity twice to go to some of the major railroad tourist attractions in the United States. One of them is the Strasburg Railroad down in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I spent a whole day down there with Ellis Bachman, who at the time was the operations manager for the Strasburg Railroad. At one point, they were bringing 400,000 plus people a year into the area. That's a lot of people. Ellis Bachman said to me in conclusion, the Strasburg Railroad is successful not because it's the Strasburg Railroad, but because it's part of Lancaster County. You could take the Strasburg Railroad anyplace else, and it wouldn't be nearly as successful as it is here in Lancaster County. Lancaster County knows how to promote itself. It's fortunate it has the Amish people down there, so that helps a lot. But you can promote things here in Vermont if you want to get somebody behind it. The other person that was really impressive, that he spoke before the NRHS chapter right here in White River Junction. That was Dwight Smith, the founder of the Conway Scenic Railroad. The Conway Scenic Railroad was over in North Conway, New Hampshire, a great tourist community. Dwight Smith chose a great place to establish a tourist railroad. But the thing is, the community has always been behind him over there. They promote the heck out of the Conway Scenic Railroad. And the Conway Scenic Railroad is a member of the White Mountains Attractions Association. Very heavily promotes all of the attractions in the White Mountain area. The people over there work together. They make it happen. Dick Miller, who was the head of the White Mountains Attractions Association, he pulls everybody together to make it happen. And Dwight Smith made, in a comment in closing his speech here in White River Junction, what you need to make a tourist railroad successful is location, location, location. Well, part of what making a location work is having the community understand what a good host community is. We've had tourist railroading here in the state of Vermont for 50 years. But you know what? There's never been a good host community. The communities have never done what they should have done to get behind the tourist railroads and the museums that have been here. And as a result, they've been lost. Is tourist railroading going to survive in Vermont? I don't know. The Vermont rail system has decided that it wants to just run charter trains now. It doesn't want to run regular excursion trains out of any of the communities because it was losing money. And you can't expect a tourist railroad to run and lose money. But you can expect a community to get behind it and help support it, help advertise it, then maybe it would make money. I don't know what's going to happen. You know, they're going to run a few trips out of Chester, Vermont this year, Vermont Rail System. I'm being told that Chester and Ludlow are getting behind the trips and they're going to try to make a go out of it. Well, let's hope that they do, because if they do, it'll be something nobody in Vermont's ever done before. I'm just going to conclude by saying that I hope this event gets the publicity it deserves, and I hope that the story of railroading and railroad advocacy in the state of Vermont is told through this event. There's a number of really good stories here in Vermont that should be told. I hope they get some publicity, and I'm told there's going to be an article in Trains Magazine. I hope it turns out to be an article not about a great kiddie show here in White River, but about what railroading in Vermont is all about and the real stories that are here. 50 years of tourist railroading in the state of Vermont, that's a big story. There aren't many communities around the country that can claim they've had tourist railroading and museums for 50 years. Vermont is one of them. The Vermont rail system. 50 years ago, the Wolfson family established the Vermont Railway. This is the 50th anniversary of the Vermont Railway, and the Vermont Railway has expanded to acquire several other railroads. It's now the Vermont Rail System. They had a celebration up in Burlington first part of the year. The press didn't cover it anywhere near as much as they should have. The Wolfson family and the Vermont Railway, they deserve a lot of credit for serving the state of Vermont for 50 years. They've done a lot of good. They deserve credit for it. There's a new railroad here in the state of Vermont. It's called the Central Maine and Quebec. It came about because there was a disaster up in Lac-Mégantic, Quebec, about a year and a half or so ago. Train got away, blew up, destroyed the town of Lac-Mégantic. The railroad that was operating at the time up there, the Maine, Montreal, and Atlantic, because of that disaster, they went out of business. And as a result, a lot of the traffic that the local railroad that comes into town from the north, Newport area, the Washington County, they lost a lot of traffic. Now this new railroad has taken over, and they're working to get the traffic back, and they're working to get together with the Vermont rail system to improve the freight traffic down here. They're supposedly going to have a locomotive down. They should deserve some credit for moving forward and making Vermont railroading a little bit better. We've got Pan Am Southern Railway. They're the successor to the Boston and Maine and Guilford. They've just started operating up into White River Junction again after many areas of not really being on the railroad scene here. They're bringing a huge amount of equipment into town for glory days. And when I say a huge amount of equipment, they're bringing more than anybody else. But they're bringing their 2 heritage diesels. They're bringing their executive train into town. This is unheard of. Why are they coming to town? Because they want to be known that they're part of the railroad scene here in White River Junction again. And they deserve credit for that. We have the New England Central Railroad here in town. About a year and a half or so ago, they became part of the Genesee and Wyoming corporate structure. Why is this important? Well, at a banquet here in White River Junction last October, the chief operating officer of the Genesee and Wyoming company made a statement, and I think it was a very significant statement, and I think it's a statement that should be promoted to tell people in the area what Genesee and Wyoming wants to do. His statement was that under Genesee and Wyoming ownership, the New England Central Railroad is here to stay. We're here to railroad. We're not just another holding company that's buying the railroad and hopefully get a little bit more business and then be able to sell it to somebody else at a big profit. This is important. You've got a railroad that wants to railroad, that wants to serve the community. And the other thing that we've got to realize that Vermont is very fortunate to have Amtrak here. They pay a lot of money to have Amtrak operate up here, because if it wasn't for the state support, Amtrak would not be operating in Vermont. The Vermonter and the Ethan Allen, they are state-sponsored trains. Why is Amtrak bringing their exhibit train up here? There were many, many other places in New England that train could have gone this year. It's on a national tour, and very few places get to have it there. It's coming to White River Junction, Vermont. It's a fantastic train. People should get out and see it, and we should also learn from the experience what Amtrak is planning to do up here. Governor Shumlin was at a meeting here in October. He talked about what Amtrak is hopefully going to do if the state of Vermont is able to have its way and support the service. We're going to have service back to Montreal again. We're going to have service over on the Western Corridor, from Rutland up to Burlington and hopefully someday down to Bennington. This is important for the state of Vermont. The public should know all about what's going on, and the tour train coming here should help promote that. So, in conclusion, can Glory Days be what it should be from a publicity standpoint? I don't know. It's all going to depend upon how it's handled by the people that are promoting the show and whether they want that to happen. So I thank you for your time. I hope I've said some things that make sense. I know I'm not the best speaker, but maybe I get my point across. Thank you.